I was 34 years old, sitting in a lawyer's office, signing my name on a stack of papers that officially ended my marriage. My hand was steady. My face was calm. And honestly, that scared me more than anything, because I had spent so many months feeling everything so deeply, and now I felt nothing. Just quiet. Just done. People always ask me, "What happened? He seemed so good for you." And I understand why they ask. From the outside, we looked fine. We looked happy. We had a house, a dog named Biscuit, a kitchen we renovated together. We had plans. But here's what they didn't see. They didn't see his mother. They didn't see what she was willing to do. And they definitely didn't see how far my husband was willing to go to protect her instead of me. This is my story, and I'm telling it because I know I'm not the only one. My name is Ashley. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your family name and your business. I was never the girl who dreamed about weddings. I was the girl who wanted a career, a life I built myself, something that was mine. I moved to Charlotte in my late 20s for work, and that's where I met Daniel. Daniel Harris was 31 when we met, tall, sandy brown hair, easy smile. He was the kind of man who held doors open without making it a big deal, who remembered the little things you said. On our third date, I mentioned offhand that I liked peach tea, and the next time he showed up with a bottle of it, just because. I thought, okay, this one pays attention. We dated for about a year before he proposed, and I said yes without hesitation. He was warm and steady, and he made me feel like I finally had a partner, not just a boyfriend. I was excited to marry him. I was excited to meet his family. His mother was named Margaret Harris. She lived about 40 minutes outside of Charlotte in a big house that used to belong to her parents. She was in her early 60s, well-dressed, always had her hair done. The first time I met her, she hugged me and said, "Oh, Daniel has told me so much about you." And she smiled at me in a way that I thought was warm, but later understood was something else entirely. Daniel had one sibling, his older brother Kevin. Kevin was 40, talked a lot about deals and investments and money he was about to make. His wife Brenda was quiet, very quiet, the kind of quiet that I now recognize as exhaustion. I liked them well enough in the beginning. I told myself every family has their thing, their dynamic. Margaret was a little overbearing, sure. Kevin was a little arrogant, yeah. But they were Daniel's family, and I loved Daniel, so I made room for them. That was my first mistake. The wedding planning started, and Margaret immediately had opinions about everything. The venue, the flowers, the guest list, the centerpieces. She called Daniel more than she called her own friends, I think. And every time I pushed back gently, Daniel would say, "She just wants to be involved. It's important to her." So I let it go and let it go and let it go. A few months before the wedding, Daniel told me he had given his mother some money. A loan, he said. She needed help with a repair on the house. He said it like it was nothing, like he was telling me he'd grabbed milk from the store. But when I asked how much, he got uncomfortable. It was $4,000 out of our joint savings, without asking me first. I was upset, not because of the money itself, but because he hadn't talked to me. We were about to get married. That was our money. He apologized, said it wouldn't happen again, and I believed him. I should have paid more attention to that moment, not because of the $4,000, but because of what it showed me about who came first in his mind when things got hard. After the wedding, life was good for a while. We settled into our routine. I was working in marketing, doing well. Daniel was in project management. We were comfortable. We had started talking about eventually buying a bigger house, maybe starting a family someday. But the family visits kept coming. Margaret and Kevin would show up on weekends, always relaxed, always happy to eat our food and sit in our living room. Kevin was always talking about his next big thing, some property deal, some investment that was going to change everything. and Margaret always looked at me with that same smile that never quite reached her eyes. She made comments, small ones. She'd say things like, "Ashley, you work so hard. Don't you ever want to just slow down?" Or, "Daniel mentioned you two haven't had time for dinner together lately. That's a shame." Little things that sounded like concern, but felt like criticism, like she was building a case against me, one sentence at a time. And I noticed that after every family visit, Daniel was different, a little more distant, a little more distracted. I'd ask him if everything was okay, and he'd say, "Yes, fine, everything's fine." But it wasn't. About 2 years into our marriage, I started noticing things with our finances. We had a joint account that we both contributed to for household expenses and savings. I checked it regularly, and slowly, the balance was lower than it should have been. I asked Daniel about it a few times, and he always had an explanation. Car repairs, a work trip that cost more than expected. He helped Kevin with something. The answers were always vague, always just enough to make me feel like I was being difficult for asking. So I started keeping my own record. I went back through the statements, month by month, and tracked every withdrawal I couldn't account for. And when I laid it all out in front of me, my stomach dropped. Over 18 months, more than $47,000 had left our accounts. Not all at once, it was small amounts here, medium amounts there, spread out just enough that it was easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. But I was looking closely now. I found out that Daniel had opened a second bank account. My name was not on it. He had been moving money into it quietly, and from there it had gone to Kevin's investment. Kevin had a property scheme going. He had found some land outside the city and convinced people it was going to be developed into something valuable. He needed investors, and Margaret had convinced Daniel that this was a family opportunity, that the money would come back tripled, and that the reason he shouldn't tell me was because, and this is the part that broke me, because I wouldn't understand. Because in Margaret's words, I didn't understand family obligations. I found all of this out because of a voicemail. Daniel had an old phone he kept in his nightstand drawer. I don't even know why I opened it that night. I think part of me already knew something was wrong, and I was finally ready to look. There was a voicemail from Margaret. It was from 8 months earlier. She was talking to him about the money, coaching him. She told him what to say if I asked questions. She told him to keep the accounts separate. She said, "She doesn't need to know everything, Daniel. This is family." I played it twice. Then I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and I just stayed there for a long time. I confronted Daniel the next morning. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just put my notes on the kitchen table and I said, "I know about the account. I know about Kevin's deal, and I heard your mother's voicemail. I want you to tell me everything." He went pale. Then he got defensive. Then he cried. He admitted to the account. He admitted to the money. He said he was sorry, that he knew it was wrong, but that his mother had made it seem so reasonable, and Kevin had promised it was a sure thing, and he didn't want to fight with me about it, and he thought it would all work out and I would never have to know. I asked him why he didn't trust me enough to tell me. He didn't have a good answer for that. He apologized. Genuinely, I think. But then he said something that told me everything I needed to know. He said, "But Ashley, she's my mother. I can't just turn my back on her." Nobody was asking him to turn his back on her. I was asking him to have been honest with me. I was asking him to have chosen our marriage, and he was still, even in that moment, protecting her. I suggested couples therapy. He agreed to go. We went twice. The second session, he told the therapist that he felt caught in the middle. The therapist asked him what he meant. He said his mother felt that therapy was making him see his family in a negative light. He didn't go back after that. Around this time, I reached out to Brenda, Kevin's wife. I didn't know her well, but I'd always sensed that she understood something about that family that she wasn't saying out loud. We met for coffee, and she cried before I even finished talking, because it had happened to her too. Not the exact same way, but close enough. Kevin had pulled money from their accounts before without telling her. Margaret had inserted herself into their finances from the beginning. Brenda had been dealing with it for years and had just accepted it as the cost of being in that family. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't oversensitive. This was a pattern. This was how that family operated. I hired a lawyer. I also brought in a financial advisor to go through everything, and that's when we found something even worse than the missing money. Some of the transfers and documents had my signature on them, except I had never signed them. Someone had forged my signature on financial documents. My lawyer was very clear with me about what that meant legally. This was not a gray area. This was fraud. I went back to Daniel with this. I needed to see his face when he heard it, and the look he gave me, it wasn't shock. It was shame. He knew. He admitted that Margaret had suggested it, that she said it was just easier than getting me involved, that I would have asked too many questions and slowed things down. Daniel either looked the other way or helped. I still don't know exactly which, and maybe it doesn't matter. I called Margaret. I don't know what I expected. Maybe some part of me still hoped she would be sorry, that she would realize what she had done. She wasn't sorry. She told me that I had never been right for Daniel, that I was too independent, too focused on work, that I didn't understand what it meant to support a family. She told me that family money stays in the family, and by that she meant that I was never truly family to her. I was just someone Daniel had brought home. I called Kevin. He laughed. He actually laughed. Said the investment was complicated and the money would come back eventually. It wouldn't. The scheme later fell apart completely. Kevin lost money too, Margaret lost money, but by then none of that mattered to me anymore. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my car in the driveway for almost an hour. I didn't cry, I just sat there. And I finally understood. Margaret had not been trying to save her son, she had been trying to keep him. She had looked at our marriage from the beginning and seen something that threatened her control over him, and she had decided, very deliberately, to take it apart. Not with a big, dramatic confrontation, just slowly, quietly, with money and manipulation, and small, careful lies over time. She had planned for me to leave. She had counted on it. I filed for divorce. At first, Daniel begged me not to. He said he loved me, that we could fix it, that he would cut his family off completely if that's what it took. And maybe he meant it. But 3 days later, after a visit from Margaret, he changed. He became cold. His lawyers started sending letters. The whole thing became adversarial fast. Margaret and Kevin tried to reclassify the transferred money as gifts to family members so it couldn't be touched in the settlement. My lawyer was ready for that. Brenda quietly sent me documents she had held on to for years, paper trails, texts, records that helped fill in the picture. She had been waiting for someone to fight back. I was glad to be that person. The case took months. I won't pretend it was easy. There were days I sat in my lawyer's office feeling completely exhausted, wondering if it was worth it. But I kept going. Eventually, we reached a settlement. I didn't recover every dollar, but I recovered enough to start over. And more than the money, I recovered something else. I recovered the truth. I had it in writing. I was not crazy. I was not difficult. I was not imagining things. On the last day, Daniel and I were in the same room for the final signing. He didn't look at me, not once. He just stared at the table and signed his name. I had spent so many nights waiting for him to fight for our marriage, to stand up just once and choose me. But even at the very end, he couldn't do it. He walked out of that room and went back to his mother. That told me everything I needed to know. It's been over a year now since the divorce was finalized. I live in a different part of Charlotte. I have a smaller apartment, and I've started over from a lot of places, financially and emotionally. It has been hard. I am not going to tell you it hasn't been. I went to therapy. Real therapy. The kind where you sit with uncomfortable things and don't run from them. I talked about Daniel, about Margaret, about the version of my life I thought I was building. I grieved all of it, because that's what it was, grief. Not just anger, not just betrayal, but actual grief for a life I believed in. And slowly, I started to feel like myself again. I want to say something to anyone watching this who sees something familiar in what I've described. If your partner hides finances from you and calls it protecting you, that is not protection. If your in-laws make you feel like an outsider in your own marriage, that is not family quirks. And if the person you married consistently chooses everyone else over you when things get hard, that is a choice. It is a choice they are making, and you are allowed to respond to it. I ignored so many signs because I loved Daniel, and I wanted to believe that love was enough. It is not enough on its own. Love without honesty is just performance, and I spent 2.5 years performing a marriage while someone was quietly taking it apart from the inside. Margaret never apologized. She never will. Kevin's investment collapsed, and the whole family lost more money than they ever took from me, which I think is its own kind of justice. Not the dramatic kind, just the quiet, slow kind, consequence. As for Daniel, I don't hate him. I have thought a lot about who he was, and I think he was also shaped by that family in ways that weren't entirely his fault. He grew up believing that loyalty to his mother came above everything else. That is what he was taught. But he was a grown man. He made choices, and those choices cost us everything. I am 34 years old, and I am starting over. Some days that feels terrifying. Most days now it feels like freedom. They destroyed my marriage for money. They treated my life like a transaction and assumed I would just disappear quietly. But I didn't disappear. I stood up. I got the truth. And the life they tried to take from me, I'm rebuilding it on my own terms, and this time it is entirely mine. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below. I read every single one. And if you're going through something similar, just know you are not alone and you are not crazy. Take care of yourself.